All right, so this week in Pax Dei, we are definitely full swing into the summer vacation period for Mainframe. We got, fortunately, a really massive lore update, but that is about it. We didn't get any special patches really coming out this week or anything other than Thelonious the Scribe's penultimate writings, specifically on the Papacy and the Church and Meliphanius, and this was all really interesting bits of information. We got some potentially included player-related lore as well, which was quite exciting. It's really cool to see Mainframe including the lore of players into the history of the world of Pax Dei. We're going to talk about all of that and a little bit more. So hello and welcome back to all of you incredibly professional consumers of Pax Dei and Pax Dei related content out there. I'm Altari the Professional Gamer, and this is another episode of the Pax Friday Review, the show where we talk about the fun, interesting, new, and exciting information that has dropped for Pax Dei over the last week. Like I said, all we got for this week, in reality, was just a very large lore update from Thelonious the Scribe. This is part 5. It says that it is the one before the last of Thelonious' texts. So we're going to go and dig into it. I'm going to head over to playpaxday.com to read through this with y'all and make some comments on it. Before we do that, if you do like this video, please don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe so you can get notified whenever we come out with new Pax Dei or Pax Dei related content, and share with any of your friends who might be interested in learning about the age of the papacy. All right, we're going to head over there. I will see ya very shortly. All right, so here we are, and there's our favorite guy right now, Thelonious the Scribe, and we have the 5th part of this the final words of Thelonious, and we've talked about all of these as they've come out. I do think that we're getting to the point in terms of lore where we might be able to warrant having a lot of deep dive into some specific parts, specifically now about the papacy, and we have more context on the Redeemers. We also have some more context on all of the demons and the princes and all of that as well. And then we've gotten all this information on all of the various cities that have existed, the ancient kingdoms, there's so much lore in Pax Dei that's been cooked over a period of what seems to be many years at this point, just based on the content that is being provided. Let's go ahead and get into this though. So what we're talking about right now, there's several different ages. There's the age of the ancients, there's the age of Elysium, we have the age of empire or the empire, and the age of the papacy as well. This particular post is primarily talking specifically about the age of the papacy. That starts, so Pax Dei, as we know it, as players, as the Scions, as we're called by in-game lore, we're popping up around the 4000s period. So this is the age of the papacy ends about 100 years before the age of Scions, which is the current age in Pax Dei history. The age of the papacy also ends specifically at the passing, or some would say, for probably good reason, the murder of the 9th Redeemer, known as Loios. Before we can talk about Loios, though, we are going to be talking about Meliphanius, who is the 8th Redeemer. She was effectively the first papist of the papacy, and it seems as though the order of the papacy is one that is marred with a lot of failures and honestly not many notable characters of upstanding potential other than Meliphanius, who originally created the order. It's interesting to me that in this particular lore update, all of the other Redeemers have been portrayed in these heroic manners, in these incredible sacrifices that they made for humanity, either going all the way back to Protanoia, who created the garden, helped humanity grow and thrive, You have Daimira, who literally sacrificed herself to take out and knock down a couple of the demon princes. And you have, for the most part, all of these redeemers going and doing crazy acts of heroism or otherwise to promote and progress humanity in one shape or form. Meliphanius created an order that ultimately failed within about 100 years. Or sorry, 1,000 years. Let me correct that. So Meliphanius originally created something that was great, but then it very quickly seemed to deteriorate over time. In my opinion, she is one of the only redeemers that seemed to have failed at what she was attempting to do, albeit there's one other glaringly large exception, that being Armazel, who took an entire order, the Sons of Light, and convinced them it was a good idea to go down into the darkest depths of Mount Medulla and get completely wrecked by something, because we never saw them again. They disappeared. Maybe they never died. Who knows? We don't know. We don't actually know what happened to them explicitly, or at least we haven't learned that yet. Meliphanius is another example of a redeemer who created something great and then progressively failed over time, or that creation deteriorated rapidly. Interesting side note on that, I guess. She was the 8th redeemer, and effectively the papacy, what it did is it took the kingdoms that existed and united them. It created, obviously, Axis Mundi, which is that center city. You can almost think of it as Rome. I mean, even if we're looking at the Pax Dei emblem, like what's up here at the top of the screen, Axis Mundi is that centered diamond square in the center. And then you have the 4 regions signifying kind of the 4 ancient, the 4 kingdoms that existed prior. It's almost like its own map. And in the center is Axis Mundi. And Meliphanius came in, opened the gates of Axis Mundi. If you have watched any of the other lore videos talking about Thelonious, from Thelonious' perspective, we have Phaonios, who is previous Redeemer, the 4th Redeemer, and Armazel the 5th. And there was a giant battle that happened in Axis Mundi, in the city, the great city of Axis Mundi. And that really kind of closed the gates off. It, for the most part, the city was left standing, but it wasn't in the best of places. You have Auriel, the 6th Redeemer, who was the one that was responsible for creating all the monasteries around the world of the creation, around Earth. And Auriel grew up on the streets of Axis Mundi. Meliphanius comes in, reopens the gates of Axis Mundi, and then does one other critically important thing that really led to the order of the papacy being the most powerful organization for a millennia, and that is the creation of the Petra Dei. Now, the normal definition, this is Latin, Petra Dei is a singular. The Petrae Dei, I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. I didn't take Latin when I was going to school, but the Petrae Dei are the pluralistic version of the stones that you can go to when you hit that nice Petra Mea button in game. Petra Mea meaning my stone, Petra Dei meaning God's stone. So these are all of the divine's stones that exist. They effectively used some of the technology, it seems, of the ancients who created the original stela, the ancient stela that we can respawn at locally in a home valley. But these were super juiced with some engravings with sigils of the church and the papacy on them. And that is what effectively allows for the creation of these home valleys, these protected areas under the protection of the divine. It also allows for fast travel. Armies are able to move between home valleys very rapidly. This creates an environment where the world becomes instantaneously more connected. The ley lines, the magic that exists in the world are all seemingly able to flow through these in a way. Maybe the Petri Dei were created on these ley lines, something of that note, but we didn't really get to that. But what she did, she ruled for 112 years. When she finally left Melifanius, when she ascended, no one saw her leave, really. It was just her robes were left on the throne of the Pope, and she vanished. And after that, the papacy seemed to be consistently marred by horrible leadership and a real falling apart and desecration of the order that was supposed to create a lot of order and bring unity and peace and collaboration between all of the four kingdoms, and turned into a vastly corrupt order where there was false persecution and ultimately, potentially, what's teased at the very end of this writing, a potential link to the death of the ninth Redeemer that came at the very end of the age of the papacy. Now, to get into this, she left behind a world of peace, but because the peace was so strong, eventually that peace hardened. And when you have a hardening peace, eventually there will be cracks. And that is indeed what happened. The world effectively went on for almost 1,000 years without seeing another Redeemer appear. Times were good, but not everything is as good as they seem. A couple of notable names here. There were several. The papacy ended up creating an army to enforce its own doctrine, and it became more of a doctrinal mechanism where it created rules and then enforced them than anything else. There was a really big influence on the militaristic nature of the papacy and the papal army, which was borrowed from the Anatolian kingdom. So Anatolia is one of the four major regions, one of the four large kingdoms. Also was where the Anatolian princes supposedly were claimed to murder Loios, the ninth Redeemer. We'll talk about that at some point. But nevertheless, there were crusades that were launched by the papacy. The crusades marched against demons. Others followed, targeting the fae, the shamans, and the singers. In time, no one was safe who remembered too much, because again, the papacy over time, rather than keeping the peace, keeping the memories of the past and remembering them, it started to revise, edit, and control what narratives were there. And that was based on a lot of the brokenness of the leadership that we have four highlighted here. Now, one of the cool aspects, so we have these houses. So it mentions the House of Thornwood, who kept the rights of the Great Mother. That might be Protanoia in reference there. However, that I think it might be more linked to the Fae. Their groves were cleared, their chants silenced beneath liturgical proclamation. So the House of Thornwood got smashed. The House of Radiance, claiming to have bloodlines linked to dragons, which are dragons even really real? Are they really real? We don't know yet. But their halls were sealed with salt and their names were struck from memory. So no recollection of dragons. Maybe that's because they don't exist. We'll have to find out. Then we have the Paladins of Soulheart. So they were the guardians of the Golden Stag. They were declared heretics. They had stood for too long with the Druids and sang too often in old tongues. So this was actually Soulheart and the Paladins of Soulheart. My recollection is part of the lore of some players that created the Soulheart narrative in game. So it was really cool to see Mainframe include Soulheart and the Paladins of Soulheart in their specific lore and history with the Golden Stag. I know the Golden Company is included. Some mythos regarding the Golden Stag as well. I mean, Golden Company, Golden Stag, come on, it's right there. But I cannot, we're not making any claim to the inclusion of Soulheart. That is really cool that the community was able to get that in there. And then the Unbowed, who would not kneel, scribes and sages who knew no throne but the one bound to the roots of the world. They vanished into the forests, making songs and stories with them. So again, these are more Fae related, Druid related, maybe some of the wild firsts in there as well. If you don't know what that is, we do have a lore post talking about that. Then in the soot and blackened ruins of Oriel's monastery, a spark remained from scattered scrolls and broken tablets. The Karma emerged. They taught that balance was not rebellion and that justice could still be lived. And we get a mention of a new pope. Papus Elusifan declared them dangerous. They were pursued and scattered, but they were not erased. So again, we even have the papacy going in and taking teachings and practices of those who were following the sixth Redeemer, Oriel, and even those were being erased. So these things don't seem like they're right, and clearly going in the wrong direction. But even the scribes were watched, and in the name of simplicity, storytellers were banished and their verses burned. In the name of purity, inquiry was condemned. The Holy See taught that if the divine wished something discovered, they would send a redeemer. So again, effectively, the papacy is claiming that they are the ones who are able to deem when a redeemer is there. And the only reason a redeemer has not come is because the divine has dictated there is nothing new that humanity needs to learn. So clearly that's why no redeemer has come. It is also important to note at this point in time as well that this is coming from Thelonious the scribe, someone whose role in the papacy even was explicitly to document and record. So if there might be some biases also included in this lore towards more favorable lights shed on scribes and those trying to preserve history, which we kind of already saw. Then we have Pope Maulin, remembered as a scholar and builder, enshrined pride. He filled cathedrals with his own image and rewrote the Psalms to praise his name. We have Pope Malhenus, who established the Inquisition. Eventually, the Inquisition became a not so great force, which now we even have to fight to this day. And this is where the Anatolian influence really came in. And it seems like a lot of problems ended up coming from Anatolia, especially with the murder of Loios. Then we have Pope Lusman, who ossified the church through silence, basically said, hey, we're not allowed to talk, and we're not allowed to do things other than we create councils who then create rules, and those are the rules that exist. We don't change anything. These councils are so big that you couldn't change anything if you wanted to, and it stifles the ability to reform, and it effectively just makes the papacy ineffective. And then lastly, there's a mention of Papus Senhua, whose laughter once brought joy even to the dying, turning levity into ritual. I do think that might be from an influence of a particular demon prince of levity. She made fasts into parades, shortened prayers into rhymes, and turned sacred vigils into games of wit and charm. Laughter replaced awe, and holiness became a performance. So this kind of made the entirety of worship towards the divine in Pax Dei into effectively a superficial thing, which obviously would never be good if we're thinking in depth about lore and how this would really affect. So again, no Redeemer came. Eventually, at the doorsteps of Axis Mundi, a cool person showed up named Loios, and he was the ninth Redeemer. Definitely has some similarities to maybe a Jesus figure or a Moses figure in actual human history, but unfortunately, Loios and the vision that he was bringing was not one that was going to last for very long. He never actually was able to accomplish what he was seeking to do, and he was murdered. And that is really what ended the age of the papacy. Things fell apart, and we have this breakdown, this entire breakdown of the papal organization. So that was a lot of lore to talk about. Hopefully you all found it pretty interesting. I find these things super cool, and it is really fun for me personally to go through, piece all of these things together, correlate them, and compile them into one big lore related episode. We do have our lore series. It is ongoing. So if you are interested, be on the lookout. We cover all of this in even more detail than what we did today. Hopefully we have some more updates coming next week. It is the month of July. The month of July at Mainframe is characteristically one of the more slower paced ones. Things will start picking back up in August if we can look back at previous years for reference. So we have maybe 2 or 3 weeks before we really start ramping things up. Maybe we get a roadmap kind of to hold us over, and then we're going to start already getting ready to prepare for what is to come in verse 4, and then ultimately what's coming with release. If it's still planned for 2025, I think they're still going to hit that target. Maybe they push it back to early 26, but as it stands right now, we have a lot of stuff coming up. And once we get through this vacation period in the month of July, there will be some fun stuff to talk about. So if you haven't done so already, please don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe so that you can get notified whenever we come out with new Pax Dei or Pax Dei related content, and share with any of your friends who might be interested. Special thanks to all of our channel members who support this channel monetarily. Thank you so much for your support. And until next time, I'm Altari, the Professional Gamer.